Hello, Reject Nation. I'm Greg Alba.
I'm John Humphrey.
Hello, Jabby Koei here.
Jabby Koei has a channel called the Jabby Koei channel, but he has now an American channel, Jabby TV. You guys should check it out. I will probably guest star on it. It'll be a special event for everybody.
I'm American.
Transition. What Culture is an awesome YouTube channel, one of my favorites. They have great list videos that sometimes I agree with, sometimes I disagree with. 8 movies you wrongly thought were sequels.
This is my first What the Culture video.
What culture?
Which culture?
What is culture?
What culture?
How many cultures?
What's culture?
Live culture.
Okay.
That's a different thing entirely.
Sequels. Hollywood's answer to
Speed
the
two
air-quote
is-
difficult second album. They need to follow a number of simple rules if they want to be successful. Things like more character development and the exploration of new ideas. But one thing a sequel definitely needs to do is actually be a sequel. Sadly, it seems that simple mantra doesn't actually seem to matter to some movies. Despite promising a continuation of established and usually quite lucrative franchises, they stand as monuments to Hollywood's occasional insistence on packaging things as part of a familiar story when, in reality, they've got nothing to do with the original film. I'm Adam from WhatCulture.com, and these are 8 movies you wrongly thought were sequels. Number 8, 10 Cloverfield Lane. Though it's set in the same world as Cloverfield, what 10 Cloverfield Lane really is,
Sequel
rather than a
adjacent.
sequel, is a brand extension. It's an opportunity for Paramount
part of
to
an
establish
anthology.
an anthology of Cloverfield movies, which will be expanded further with God Particle in 2018, though the title will most likely change. They aren't linear in any way, and there's no real hint that they're even tied together in the same way serial movies traditionally are. Instead of thinking of it as a franchise, it's best to think of Cloverfield as a way to model films. They're siblings rather than sequels, and each will stride out on their own journeys confidently with the marketing boost of belonging to an established brand, but no requirement to follow on narratively. It's all terribly clever. Number 7, Home Alone 3. Can you say cynical cash grab? Because I can. Home Alone 3 is less a straight sequel to the excellent Macaulay Culkin movies and more a completely unrelated movie with one basic similarity: the fact that it's called Home Alone. The massive air quotes sequel manages to lose everything that made the original good, namely the McAllister clan and the Wet Bandits, but it's the complete lack of any tie to the other films beyond the vague idea of home invasion and some funny traps that's the real crime. And it's that kind of tenuous relationship that would suggest you could claim the Saw movies are set in the Home Alone universe, or the original Purge, or Funny Games. You can't just have plot similarities and expect anyone to accept it's a sequel without any of the other qualifiers. I'm sorry, it's just a rule. Number 6, The Bourne Legacy. Even with a different lead actor, played fairly well by Jeremy Renner, it has to be said, it seemed like we were getting a sequel with Bourne Legacy. Given that the title was also the same as a genuine Jason Bourne novel written by Eric von Lustbader in 2004. Sure, there are links and a few similar characters, but Legacy is an entirely different beast, which introduces chemical augmentation to its super soldier plot, and whose only real tie to Bourne is the idea of shady government black ops programs. Legacy is an anthology movie, the same as 10 Cloverfield Lane was, and it arguably might have done better critically and at the box office if they hadn't lumbered it with the Bourne brand name. That way they wouldn't have been directly compared to the films that had come before it, which ultimately made it very obviously appear inferior. Number 5, Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. It should go without saying that Michael Myers is synonymous with the Halloween brand. Hell, he is the brand, but the studio found out the hard way when they had the audacity to make a sequel without him. Looking back at it now, they'll have seen that while they did put a 3 in the name and released it as part of the Halloween series, Season of the Witch was nowhere near being a sequel to the first 2 movies. Why, you ask? Well, the main draw character is gone for a start, and the mythology focuses on something entirely different, as if the studio were trying to diversify and explore those goddamn anthology movies I keep mentioning. While it mercifully didn't kill the franchise completely, all this film did was make the other 2 look weaker as part of a set, like some kind of weird concept album released after 2 runaway hits. 2 runaway, murderous, stabby hits. Number 4, Indiana Jones and the Temple
It's
of
a
Doom.
prequel?
If it wasn't for the opening confirmation that the film is set in 1935 and thus before Raiders of the Lost Ark, you could still be forgiven for believing that Temple of the Doom is actually a straight sequel to the first Indiana Jones movie. After all, why would they really need to make a prequel when Raiders had only just introduced the character and there was no need for the soft reboot opportunity usually afforded by prequelization? But it definitely is a prequel, and not the direct follow-up the
Did you know that?
marketing campaign
Yes.
seemed to be suggesting it was going to be. Not a big deal on the face of it, but it does make the fact that indie claims in Raiders to not believe in magic, I quote, a lot of superstitious hocus pocus, all the more confusing, considering he'd not long ago encountered voodoo and possession. Hell, maybe it's just
Is a
religious
prequel.
magic he wasn't a fan of. Number 3, Troll 2. Somewhat infamously in the video game world, the version of Super Mario Bros. 2 released to the Western market was, in fact, a different game entirely, with Mario characters plopped in to maximise Western appeal. The same trick was attempted by US distributors when they were handed the movie Goblins. Clearly not confident of the film's ability to succeed as an independent under its own power, they renamed it Troll 2 after the 1986 original, which had made more than $5 million from a relatively small $700,000 budget. Anyone who was tricked into believing it was a sequel would have noticed immediately that it wasn't one. The two films have no
Wow,
connection,
really?
and the title is a complete misnomer given the lack of any actual trolls. Number 2, The Evil Dead 2. There's been some debate for years over the true nature of The Evil Dead 2, with a fairly loud thread of fans refusing to accept it as anything other than a sequel. Sure, it retreads the same ground, they'll say, but it's different enough to consider it a straight sequel to the first, given that the first 7 minutes just are a recap of what came before. And sure, that justification works if you wanted to, but the reality is that Evil Dead 2 is basically a redo from a clean slate, with a recap wiping out the need to watch the first film. Just to make matters even more confusing, the recap is littered with inconsistencies to suggest its events possibly didn't even happen. I mean, where are the dead bodies around the cabin? Regardless, the similarities between this and the first film are too obvious to miss, and I'm sorry, it's not a sequel. Please, put the pitchfork down. It's not. No, God, please, don't let me go. Number 1, Dirty Dancing 2, Havana
It's
Nights.
definitely a sequel.
The second anyone even suggested making another Dirty Dancing movie almost 20 years after the original should have been the exact same moment the conversation was killed dead. Sadly, that wasn't the case, and the studio decided to bring out a belated follow-up in 2004, starring Romola Garai and Diego Luna, who find love in
That was
Cuba
Diego
rather
Luna?
than in Kellerman's. It was set in 1958, a full 5 years before the original for some reason, and it essentially just steals the plot. Even worse, Patrick Swayze actually turned up for a cameo as an unnamed dance teacher, confusing the timeline entirely and basically ensuring that it's impossible to even consider this a complete work of cinema, never mind a sequel. So that was our list.
Would Desperado be? Did people think that was a sequel, or
It was a remake also.
It was a remake, right?
I mean, in my opinion.
Well done, you made it all the way to the end of the video. Now, I'm not just here to increase our market share with women aged 18 to 35, but to tell you to watch one of these other videos we've made that are probably quite good. So,
Yep.
go on. Off it. That one or that one.
I don't see the button.
There you go.
Don't say that. We downloaded the video.
I liked What Is Culture.
Did you guys see? I mean, no, you saw 10. Did you see 10
I saw
Cloverfield?
that, yeah.
I like 10 Cloverfield Lane. And yeah, I agree with that. I wouldn't call it a sequel. The natural inclination is to call it a sequel, just because it has Cloverfield in the title. I like the anthology approach to the Cloverfield movies that they're doing. I'll admit, when I thought it was a Cloverfield sequel, I thought that was really cool. And even when I saw the trailer, I'm like, oh, this is a cool approach to take to a sequel. But then when I watched the movie, I'm like, oh, it's not a sequel at all. It takes place in the future when the aliens have taken over the Earth. But it also seemed like the types of aliens, there was like a disease that was spreading, if I remember correctly. I only saw it one time in the theaters. But it seemed like the rules of the world and the creatures were also different in 10 Cloverfield Lane.
Okay, so if
It's
Terminator...
more like a Black Mirror.
Let's say, if Terminator, the one with Christian Bale, didn't have John Connor in it, would that be a sequel or part of an anthology?
I think that would be part of an anthology.
But because John Connor's in it, it's considered a sequel.
Yeah.
And Arnold's in it.
Because it is like a different story in the same world. So, and I like that approach to doing these kinds of things. It's only a sequel insofar as like the subplot of it's being the same world but later.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, the main action is almost unrelated. And you spend so much of the movie not even realizing or not even supposed to have realized exactly what's happening outside.
This is more of a technicality list.
Yeah, this is a distinction.
I would agree with that.
It's a clarifier.
Because I think this can go either way. It can be considered an anthology, but it can also be considered a sequel because it is part of the same overarching story of the alien invasion.
See, this
It's
is more of a
advancing
list.
that situation.
This is more of a list that creates a debate on what is a sequel. Home Alone 3.
I would agree with this one. It was just a reboot, basically, with a new kid. It's not continuing the same villains or the same
Kid
hero.
even looks like Macaulay Culkin. Let's get a kid who looks like Macaulay Culkin, and we'll double down on the amount of villains in this movie.
Yeah. I feel like that's one of those sequels you used to get a whole lot of in the 90s and stuff, where it's like, yeah, it's that premise, you know.
Did you guys see Home Alone 3?
I did.
Not all of it.
I really wish they would create a Home Alone cinematic universe where all the kids eventually come together to take down all the bad guys.
All the bad
together.
guys. It's a skyscraper.
And they set up a
on every
perfect
floor.
home invasion. Apparently multiple kids who could take on multiple bad guys breaking into their home.
Make it the raid. Just
Yeah.
make it like some kind of bottle movie where there's just these bandits trying to get to the top of this tower and there are kids on every level just messing their shit up.
This went in a weird
Yeah,
direction.
you can
I
make the
would-
bad guys the heroes, actually. That's how you can make the robbers the heroes.
Kids. Yeah, it's gone too far now. We realize these kids are all messed.
Sort of all a revenge story.
Yeah.
The next Karate Kid. Is that a sequel?
If Mr. Miyagi's in it, I would consider it a sequel because you're still continuing it with a character.
But Danielson's not in it.
I know he's not the Karate Kid, but it's like Creed is to me a sequel to the last Rocky because Rocky's in it, even though it's about Creed. The Bourne Legacy, to me, I agree with what they say here that this probably would have done better if they didn't put the word Bourne in it. If you put the marketing clear enough to know that this was in the Bourne universe, I think it would have done better that way. Because I think when you slap the movie Bourne on it, I don't mind that it's not a direct sequel to Ultimatum. I think when you put the Bourne word on it, it completely makes you go, well, if Matt Damon's on in this, what the hell do I want to watch this for? You know?
It's Jeremy Renner.
Yeah, I feel like they should have restructured the title because it's the same, The Bourne something, and that
Yeah.
leads you completely to believe that it's going to be another Matt Damon thing.
Like, if you saw the Bourne Legacy as just the title, you would think that you're going to go watch the sequel to the Jason Bourne films.
This is one time where I feel like Bourne plus subtitle
Yeah.
or something.
Because Jeremy Renner is really good in the role. And there's some cool, there's not a lot of action, but there's some cool action in it. Because I agree with what he said, that if it didn't have the Bourne Legacy as a title, it probably wouldn't have gotten as much crap as it did. And it probably would have gotten better reception as long as it was established up front that this was part of the Bourne world. Because when you watch this, you just end up comparing it to the Bourne trilogy.
The Bourne Cinematic Universe.
Yeah, the Bourne Cinematic Universe. The Bourne-verse.
That was quick. They showed in the trailer that he wasn't in it.
Yeah, I know, but you still call it the Bourne something, and it's just kind of a frustrating approach. Because then it makes you think of those sequels where they do a sequel, but the characters aren't in it that we love it, and you end up going, well, those movies suck, so why would I want to watch those?
I can see it being a thing where people who aren't keeping up hugely with movie news and stuff would be like, well, what is this? Is it Bourne? But it's no Matt Damon. What's going on here? and then losing interest kind of based on that. Like, I can see how that might happen to somebody not being like, let me research the story behind this movie.
Yeah.
Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. This movie is come back in the public eye, or at least in the horror community in the past few
I think
years.
in a weird way, it's kind of opened the door for its semi-supernatural elements.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
the future Halloween movies with Michael Myers, like, coming back from the dead. Because
Yeah,
the
Man
first
in
and
Black
second one are
and Voodoo.
realistic, kind of. Except for, like, technical things where you're like, there's no way he would have just ran away from that. You know? Season of the Witch gets a lot more of that creepy, more George Romero type of style, I think, of, like, Creepshow in a way.
Yeah.
It has a little bit more of that element.
Season of the Witch, especially watching it after knowing, so it's not a big surprise. When you go in, it is kind of a fun, spooky fan. Like, I get what they wanted to do, because they wanted to turn this into a Halloween anthology with a different creepy story every year, and it just, once you do Michael twice, you can't.
Yeah, that's the problem. They did Halloween 1 and 2 with a direct storyline, then you can't just subtly expand it.
Like, and they're super linear, the first two.
Yeah.
The second movie is like right where we left off the next moment.
Yeah.
Season of the Witch is like, it's got Tom Atkins, it's got a whole different vibe, it's got a whole different set of characters you're focused on.
Remember when Paranormal Activity, they did Paranormal Activity, the marked ones, and they didn't call it part 4 or something, when you could have, I think.
Yeah.
It could have been this type of situation, but I think that's what made it fine, the marked ones, was not having a part 4 or whatever on it. And I feel like that could have been passable for this if they didn't put Halloween 3 specifically, and they just said Halloween than the subtitle.
This is an obvious thing I would agree with. It is a prequel, not a sequel, because it comes before Raiders of the Lost Ark. The plot hole they're talking about where he's never experienced magic before, that kind of thing happens. It used to happen more like, that happened in Friends a lot. Chandler was like, Ross, you did music? And then later on, in later seasons, you find out that they did music together. That's forgivable in my opinion. Who gives a shit?
I do associate those things with, I guess, older franchises, where it's like, there wasn't the ability to, like, scrub every detail quite the same way.
Right.
Yeah.
So you could be like, just throw that out there. Whatever.
Right. Well, VHS tapes weren't like, not everyone had tapes or DVDs at the time, and I think people gave less of a shit about like exactness of everything. They're like, it's cool, it's fine. It's another Indiana Jones movie.
Yeah.
This is fun.
And it has an episodic quality as a series anyhow. And I just discovered this was a prequel like 2 days ago. So.
Why did
What?
why did Spielberg make it a prequel though, or Lucas, whoever made this decision?
It wasn't his story. It was George Lucas' story.
But what was the point? It serves no purpose to make it a year before.
All I know is that George Lucas was going through his divorce when he wrote it, and so he wanted it to be dark.
That's why it was darker. Spielberg I thought was going through that.
Spielberg's still with the
divorced from each
same
other.
wife.
Yeah.
Spielberg's with the same woman that he met on.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
She's in Temple of Doom.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
So Lucas was going through his divorce.
That's right. I
Yeah.
remember hearing that. Yeah. They might have just made a mistake when they threw those words in there because it makes no difference to the movie if it's 1935 or 1936.
I feel like the fans have scrutinized it way harder than anyone who was involved in the making of the movie. Like, they just didn't care. They're like, it's just another buck. It's another fun movie. So.
Well, and it is another Indiana Jones adventure. Even if part 3 is technically beyond all of these, you know, there are just isolated adventures that he goes on. And there are certain details that we remember, but, you know, they're not hyper-linear.
I feel like people make it a big deal, like calling it like it's actually a prequel. But like, if you change it to 1937, it had the exact same script with the exact same dialogue, you'd be like, no, it's a sequel. That's the only thing that makes it a prequel, is that it says 1935 at the beginning. That's it. Other than that, it's a sequel. You know?
That's true. You're right. I mean, if they just changed that one thing, but it wouldn't make it any better a movie.
Actually, there were no Asian
So.
children in 1936. So, just for that 1 year.
I knew something was historically inaccurate.
Because it makes it more confusing, because I'm like, what happened to this woman from Temple of Doom? Why isn't she in Raiders of the Lost Ark? Why isn't Short Rounder? Like, what happened to all these people?
Just abandoned his child sidekick somewhere.
But that kind of thing would always happen with movies in the 70s and 80s whenever there was a sequel. People would just drop out of one movie and you know...
Let's get these characters for this one. Now let's get these characters for this one.
That's just what happened. I love his reference to Mario Brothers, by the way. That was a great one because Miyamoto, I don't know how much involvement he had with Super Mario Brothers 2, but he says that that's his favorite Mario game.
Even though that it was just a bunch of Mario inserts in a separate game.
They took a game that was completely different and brought it to the States and just put Mario on top of it. They Mario sprites and whatnot. Bowser, I guess, or Koopa, whatever, whoever the bad guy was in that game. Still Miyamoto's favorite Mario game to date.
I feel like you could make a list out of movies like Troll 2 that were like snatched up and melted into somebody else's franchise just to give them a better shot at performing. Because there are a lot of movies that's happened with, and this is probably the most famous of them.
Well, they just literally just changed the title, though. They didn't even try linking it at all or
Not
changing
at
the
all.
designs or doing reshoots. Because I remember Saw 2 with Darren Lynn Bousman, his script was an original script, and then someone along the line thought, like, this would be a good Saw sequel, actually. They rewrote his script to make it link more to Saw, but it was already his idea. That was separate from Saw.
It just seems like studios will do anything to grab a buck. Like, this was an easy one, though. If Troll 1 was popular, then just slapping that title is going to bring in a certain amount of money. This movie's already made. All they need to do is put this title on it. Bang. Well, you would do it if you were in the same position. Like, I don't hate on it.
I get it. Well, you know, I'm sure they knew it wasn't a terrific film when they had it in their hands anyways.
They must have not had any hope for an actual Troll sequel to go ahead and just use that title.
This type of thing has happened more than once, though. Like, this is just a strategy that plays out. Because sometimes, they will, like, take things and rework them to be parts of franchises. I feel like there are a surprising amount of movies that do just get title grafted.
They make a great point about Dirty Dancing 2, Havana Nights. It's already a prequel if it's set 5 years before the first Dirty Dancing.
Yeah.
And the whole point about Patrick Swayze making a cameo as a teacher makes it a million times more confusing. What would you call that film? Just its own thing. It's not a sequel or a prequel at that point.
It's an alternate timeline.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Where Patrick Swayze was born slightly earlier.
Isn't it just a remake at that point?
Yeah, to me that's just a remake. They take the same plot and they just make it a little different setting, but then you have Patrick Swayze, he's just cameoing as his teacher. That makes it a remake.
That's
what a remake is.
I feel like that falls into the Home Alone 3 category. I feel like this list has a few different categories. It's got like the anthology category, the basically a remake category, and then the sort of...
Well, they never actually said 2, right? So it's basically like Desperado. El Mariachi
Yeah.
Desperado. It's the same kind of thing.
But El Mariachi and Desperado are very different titles. One means guitar. Yeah, comedy. Insert that iMovie drum roll.
The thing is, the reason why you go with the same title is for obvious reasons, because it'll bring in money because of the familiarity.
Like Evil Dead 2?
Well, Evil Dead 2...
Havana Nights
Evil Dead 2 Havana
They should
Nights.
have a merge or something. That would be an amazing movie.
Cabin is in the most picturesque little tropical.
I think Evil Dead 2 is totally a sequel. I don't agree with this statement. I feel like it's if anything, it's like a reboot sequel. It plays out differently because in the first one there's several characters and eventually comes down to Ash in the end. This just starts off with Ash.
But they showed this shot right here, and it's exactly like the shot from the previous film.
Well, that's what I mean. It's like a sequel / reinvention. He kind of did a mix of what Rob Rodriguez did with El Mariachi and Desperado, where Desperado is a little different, but for the most part, it's an updated remake, and he's able to do more of what he actually wanted to do.
Okay.
And that's what he does here, but he's still continuing the story. It still ends very different. It still picks up after the events of the last one, where he's alone at this cabin, whereas before in the first one, it's a very specific plot of people showing up at the cabin, a group of friends, and people start getting killed off, and it's just Ash at the end. This one starts off where all his friends have died, and it's just Ash. So it's a sequel.
I actually fall on the more conflicted side of this part of the argument because I thought they made some decent points. And Evil Dead 2 to me has always felt, at least not 100% like a sequel. It has felt very much like a reinvention as well, and I don't think that the first Evil Dead is highly necessary. It's necessary to you appreciating the overall, scope of Evil Dead, but in terms of the events of that movie, they recap the past and you can kind of skip it, and
But
it seems to recontextualize the past as just sort of a footnote that came before this.
But they recap the past with footage from the first movie.
I don't think this one cuts and dries in any perfect direction. I don't think it's perfectly a sequel, but I don't think it's just a reboot, I do kind of feel it occupies its own weird space of like, yeah, I get how this isn't a continuation. It's not leaning on what came before it. In fact, it's reorganizing and recontextualizing what came before it. But it does kind of factor into this overall story, whereas like if you zoom out on Ash, that feels like it is a sequel because he starts out as this, kind of wimpy college student, and then the second one, he's a little more coming into his own, he's a little more badass, than the third one, he's Ash.
Here's a serious question for you. Is Spider-Man a sequel to Evil Dead?
He's not Ash.
I know, I'm just...
I hope it is. I hope it's a sequel to
Same
Evil
characters.
Dead, how cool would that be to see Spider-Man
Same
take
director.
on the Deadites?
All right, guys. Well, do you agree with this list? And do you have any list video recommendations that we could do of our own? That would be very helpful to know what you guys would like us to break down, because we get recommendations all the time. But we'll go to you guys directly. Guys, you can subscribe to The Real Rejects. Please click that notification bell. You can check us out on Patreon. Become a Patreon Jack today. It's like a second YouTube channel. Post a lot. And Jabby TV is on the Jabby TV channel. Has a lot of his own reactions as well. Make sure to subscribe to his channel. We'll probably cameo on there sometime soon. It'll be a sequel.